In this video, you'll learn how to create what's known as a skeleton loader for your repeating group.
The librarian?
Now, I bet you're wondering, what on earth is a skeleton loader, and why should you even care? Look, in simple terms, a skeleton loader is typically a series of grey elements that display on your page while content is loading. It just helps show your end users that content is about to be displayed. So your app is in the process of doing something behind the scenes. Now, pretty much every major app you could think of takes advantage of these skeleton loaders. So that's why it's so important that we learn how to add them into Bubble as well. Now, there's so much that I want to share with you here, so let's just grab our Bubble editor and we can get started. Before we jump in today and I explain how we can actually create what's known as a skeleton loader inside of your Bubble app, what I just wanted to do was take the time to first explain what on earth a skeleton loader is and why you should even care about using them. Now look, a skeleton loader is one of those things where you probably haven't heard of that term in the past, but I can almost guarantee you've interacted with them on a daily basis. And perhaps the best example I can think of is on a platform like YouTube. So if I was to open up a new tab here and just type in YouTube, what you'll notice when I hit enter here is that when the site loads, all of the content isn't immediately displayed on the page. As you can see, where there would normally be video tiles that are being displayed, they were filled in with just a little grey box to indicate that the page was loading. And look, you'll notice that pretty much every platform does this. I'm talking things like not only YouTube, but LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Skeleton loaders are literally everywhere, but you've probably never paid attention to them for the right reason. When you see a skeleton loader, it just creates a beautiful end user experience where you as the end user know that the app is trying to load data. So you don't think that the app is broken or slow. Now look, although it might take a couple of seconds to actually load and display all of the data on the page, your attention is kind of hooked in the meantime because you're getting this promise that the content is coming. Now, if you were to take, for an example, an app that didn't have a skeleton loader, which is every Bubble app by default, when the content is loading, there would just be a blank page. Now, although the content is loading, we as the end users would probably just look at that blank page and assume that the app is broken or not loading, because there's no way to communicate with us that the content is on its way. So that is the importance of a skeleton loader. One of the big points you'll hear when it comes to optimizing your app performance inside a Bubble is this term known as perceived performance, which is greater than the actual performance. So most people think that when their app is slow or they've got lots of data that they need to load, that they need to try and optimize all of their searches or add something like pagination onto their repeating groups. Now look, all of those things will help the actual performance, which of course is a great thing to do, and I would recommend it inside of your Bubble app. But one of the easiest ways to create a better end user experience is to enhance the perceived performance of your app. And skeleton loaders are the best way to do this. As I mentioned before, a skeleton loader kind of fills in the place of the actual content, so it seems like your app is working. And so if you want to try and create a faster looking app that's going to enhance the end user experience for your own app users, this is the tutorial for you. Now today I'm going to show you how we can build a skeleton loader for a repeating group, because this is probably one of the most common use cases I would use them for inside a Bubble. But look, later on I'm going to explain all of the different ways in which you can use them. But if I jump into Bubble, I just want to show you how I've set up a repeating group. So I'm going to assume today that up to this point, you've probably created a repeating group and it might be loading a little bit slow. So I imagine you've designed your own repeating group in your own unique way, not the exact same way I've shown you here. So I'm not going to focus too much on how I've designed this repeating group, but I just want to quickly show you the data in which I'm trying to load. So this repeating group, when I double click on it, is just searching through a list of users in my database. So literally I've just performed a search for every single user. Now the thing about each user is that if I open up my data tab here, I have a few different data fields. So there's some basic things like the user's name, their profile photo, which department they work at. But what I've also done is I've added two very large and heavy data fields, which is literally just called a large file, which is storing as a file, and some large text, which is storing as text. And the reason I've added these on my user data type is because I intentionally just want to try and slow it down for this tutorial. When you've got lots of heavy data fields under one data type, this is where you're going to start to see performance issues inside of your Bubble app. Now look, today I'm not here to teach you how to optimize your database. I have other tutorials on that. But essentially, if I jump over to my app data and select all of my users, you'll see that for every large file, I've stored a video file, and for the large text, every person is storing a large body of text. But again, the purpose of this was to just try and intentionally slow my database down, so that way we can see that skeleton loader in real time when I run a preview in a moment. And then if I also just jump back to my design tab here, when it comes to the elements inside of my repeating group, I just have a group here, and inside of that group, I'm just displaying a user's profile photo, their name, their email, and the department that they work at. Now, once again, I imagine you've got your own repeating group, but this is just how I've structured mine. And now from here, this is where the fun part begins. I'm just going to quickly jump back into my Notion checklist here, because this is going to highlight all of the key features in which I'm going to walk you through when it comes to creating our skeleton loader. Now, if you want to follow along with this checklist, I'll be sure to include a link to this in the description of this video. But the very first thing we need to do is create what's known as the skeleton loader, or a loading component. And the way we can do this is by using the React Skeleton website. So we're going to click on this link. It's going to take us through to this site here called skeletonreact.com. And as you'll see on the right hand side here, it's going to allow us to customize our own skeleton loader. So this is what your page is going to display while your repeating group is loading. So essentially within this, you want to use this drag and drop builder to replicate exactly what your repeating group is going to look like. Now, if I jump over to my Bubble app, within my repeating group, I obviously have the circle profile photo and then 3 bits of text. So as you can see in the past, I've already built this out. But what I'm going to do is just delete these and rebuild this from scratch again. So what I love about this tool is that it is a completely visual interface. And look, if we're coming from a world in Bubble, which is visual programming, we love ourselves a visual interface. So all you need to do is drag out a bunch of different shapes onto your page. And I don't know if you can really see it too well here, but it's automatically going to create that kind of loading animation inside of each shape. So you can grab shapes here, you can grab things like a circle, you can add squares. It's really up to your own interpretation for what you need to build out inside of your skeleton loader. But something I should just quickly point out is that when it comes to the overall canvas here, feel free to customize this canvas size. So if you find that you need more space inside of your editor, you can just manually change these values. So I can make this something like 2000 pixels in width or 2500. It really just depends how large your repeating group is going to be on your page. But right now, I'm just going to rebuild my skeleton loader to match my repeating group. So as you can see, I've got my user's profile photo there. I've got my first text element. I'm then going to make a copy of this second text element. I will just drag this out. And then I'm going to do that for a third text element. We'll just drag that out and line it up beside there as well. Now, while you're also editing this skeleton loader, you can customize things like the actual loading animation. So right now, the speed here is configured at 2, whereas if I wanted this animation to be faster, I could make it 1. And as you'll see, that loading animation will blink faster. I personally think that 2 is the right animation speed you should use. It's just going to keep a smooth loading experience that seems intuitive. And then if you also wanted to change the color of your loader, you could do this. So I could make this red. And as you'll see, it will now pulse with the red. Or if I just wanted to change the background color of the actual elements themselves. So that is the color before it fades in that loading animation. You can change this here. Personally, I just like to keep everything at a light shade of gray though, because that seems to be the industry standard. So what I'm going to do is just adjust those again. And something else I should also highlight when it comes to building out your loader is that because this is filling the void for a repeating group that's loading, you just need to duplicate a couple of different lines here to indicate that we're loading a list of items inside of our app. So what we need to do is just duplicate every single element here and just drag it down. So that way we can create the perception that a list or a repeating group is in fact being loaded. Now look, I'm just going to be really rough with this today. I'm just going to drag these out where I think they should be. I'm not going to take too much time to make sure these are perfectly in line, but I'm going to add, let's say, 4 rows here. So I'll quickly just duplicate this again, drag this down. And I can see here that I need more height on my canvas, so I'm going to set this to be, let's say, 250 pixels. Still not enough, so I'm going to go 280, and I can see that that is now enough. I'm just going to fix that up. Make a couple of copies of these, and look, perhaps I might even just quickly skip ahead here, so that way you don't have to watch me drag 6 of the same lines across.
A few moments later.
Okay, so I finished designing my skeleton loader. And look, if you wanted a moment to actually design the rest of yours, I'd recommend pausing this tutorial right now and doing just that. But from here, something I wanted to point out is that although on the right-hand side of the page, we were using a completely visual interface, you may have noticed that on the left-hand side of the page, all of this code was being generated. Now yours might not look like mine, and the reason for that is because by default, the skeleton loader will create this in React code. So yours will probably look something like this. So this is all the actual code that has been generated in order to create this animation. Now look, thankfully, you don't need to interpret a single line of this code. Your boy here is a completely visual developer, so I intend to stay that way. But what we do need to factor in is that if we scroll on down, we just need to grab the formatting of this code in an SVG format. Now that's going to work well with Bubble, not React. So that's why we just need to select this option. Then from here, you need to copy this code here to your clipboard, because we'll now jump back into Bubble and create a way to display this element. So back in our Bubble editor, I have my page here with my repeating group on it. Now, how on earth can we display that skeleton loader, which has been generated in a separate tool? All we need to do is grab a HTML element and add it onto our page, and we can paste that SVG code directly inside of that. So under my visual elements, I'm going to grab the HTML element. I'll add this onto my page anywhere, and I'm just going to paste in that code. Then what you're going to notice here is that it's going to start automatically playing the animation that we've created as an SVG file. But of course, this is currently being cut off, so we need to update the dimensions of this. So within my layout tab for this element, I'm going to make this fully responsive across my page, and I want it to take up the full width of my page. So I will just unselect that this should be a fixed width. I'm going to set the minimum width to be 0 and leave the maximum width as infinite. So that way this can be as large or as small as my browser needs to be. And when it comes to the height of this element, the minimum height is currently set as 150 pixels. Whereas if you remember, in my skeleton loader, I'd set the height of my canvas here to be 280 pixels. So I just need to ensure that the minimum height here is also 280 pixels, and it will now display all 4 rows that I have generated. But right now, of course, this element isn't really in line with my repeating group, and that's because if I click on my repeating group, you can see that there's 50 pixels of margin on each side of this element here. So it's not sitting flush on the borders of my page. And look, even inside of my repeating group, the group which displays all of my elements has 10 pixels of margin on each of its borders as well. So I need to factor in these 60 pixels of margin on each side of my repeating group. So I'm going to click on my HTML element, and perhaps I could update the name of this to be called HTML skeleton loader, just so that way inside of our element tree here, we know exactly what this is used for. But now if I head over to my layout tab and just add in some margin on the left hand side, I'll add 60 pixels of margin and then also 60 pixels of margin on the right. And I might add 20 pixels of margin at the top, because when this repeating group is not being displayed, I'm obviously going to display this. And I just need to make sure it still has some space between the main heading on my page. Now that's how we can add the skeleton loader onto our page. So I'm going to quickly just jump back into my Notion checklist and tick off that I've explained how we can actually customize this using the visual canvas, how we've been able to copy that SVG code across. And of course, at this point in time, I've also shown you how we can add the HTML element onto our page. But now we need to make sure the skeleton loader is in sync with our repeating group on the page. So I only want this loader to be displayed when our repeating group is loading. When the repeating group has successfully loaded and it displays data, I no longer want this to be shown. So we can do this with a relatively easy condition. What we're going to do within our layout tab is first of all, uncheck that this element should be visible on page load. So that's going to make sure that this element is hidden by default. I'm also going to check this option to collapse this element when it's hidden. So that way it's not going to take up any empty space on my page when it is being hidden. I'm then going to head over to my conditional tab. I'm going to create a condition and just recognize when my repeating group, so I'm going to type in the word repeating and select my repeating group user, which is my repeating group here, which displays a list of users. When it is loading, what I'm going to do is select that this element is visible and tick that that should be true. And now if I was to run a preview of my page here, watch closely, because as this repeating group loads, and look, it is still going to be relatively quick, what you'll notice is that the skeleton loader will be there taking its place. So I'm going to hit preview. And as you could see very momentarily, our skeleton loader did load. And look, to be honest, that load time was quite quick because I'm only displaying 4 users here. But if I was to quickly just jump back into Bubble, head to my Appearance tab, and select on my repeating group, what I'm going to do is uncheck that there should be a fixed number of rows. So I'm going to display all of the entries in my repeating group, not the first 4. I'll then run another preview of this, and this might take a little bit longer to load. And there you go. So because I had a longer list of users, it did take slightly longer, but thankfully my skeleton loader sat in its place. So what I'm going to do is refresh my page one more time here. You could see my loader was being displayed, and now what I'm going to do is delete my loader and refresh the page, and you'll see the difference. So when I refresh the page here, it's kind of just blank, and then all of a sudden our repeating group appears and it kind of just hits you in the face. Now look, I know this isn't the most essential thing you think of when you start planning your app build, but it's the little things like this that are going to enhance the end user experience for the people who actually use and pay for your app. Just because your app is built in a tool like Bubble doesn't mean you need to compromise when it comes to things like user experience. All of these small little details are still super important. Now, before we wrap up this tutorial, there is just one last thing on my checklist that I wanted to talk about, and that is that when it comes to using skeleton loaders, they don't have to be specific to repeating groups. So if we were to jump back into the skeleton loader tool and scroll all the way down to the bottom, they have some examples here in a library. And what you'll notice is that these skeleton loaders cater to a bunch of different elements. So there's whole pages here. If you scroll on down, you can find things like the repeating group, which is the example I just shown you. If you scroll on down, you could add one for a bar chart. So perhaps while your chart is loading inside a Bubble, you could add this kind of loader. So look, if you ever need to source inspiration, I'd recommend checking out the library of existing skeleton loaders that they have here. And of course, my repeating group today was more of like a horizontally displayed element, whereas you can get things like vertical elements here for repeating groups. And there's even examples here for message threads. So if you're loading a list of chat threads inside of a repeating group, you can just display this loader instead. But look, that concludes everything that I wanted to walk through for this tutorial today. I hope that you were able to learn something useful. And I also hope that every single time you use an app, whether it be your own Bubble app or an existing app like YouTube or LinkedIn, you'll really start to pay attention to things like these skeleton loaders, and they'll help give you a source of inspiration for creating your own incredible application. If you found this video useful and you wanted to stay up to date with any additional Bubble resources I share, I'd always recommend hitting that subscribe button on my channel, so that way you can be the first to know whenever I drop a new tutorial. In the meantime though, I just wanted to say a massive thank you for taking the time to watch this specific video, and I wish you all of the best on your own no-code journey.